Hello and welcome to our first ever episode of Behind the Red Pen. I'm Dr. Anthony and I'm joined each episode by teacher and examiner Nathan, where we will ask the questions that schools assume you know the answers to, as well as getting a teacher's viewpoint from the other side of the red pen.
That's me. But Anthony, there's so much going on in schools, in education. Where do we start? Subjects, teaching, exams, school dinners. What?
Yeah, I knew that was coming. Um, we'll be guided each month by what's been happening in the news, developments in education, and then effectively what that actually means on the ground for education. So let's find out what a teacher makes of it behind the red pen. This month, we have our two topics we're going to discuss, and they're mobile phones and work week. So we're going to crack on. And Nathan, you're a teacher.
I am.
How often do you have to take a phone from a student?
So, great question. Um, I probably don't only take a phone once or twice a term. The students in our school are pretty good,
Mm.
and although phones aren't allowed, they tend to more or less stick to that. So yeah, not too much. Although schools I've previously worked in, you'd take one or two a day.
Oh,
So it depends how good the kids are, what the rules are, how often they're enforced.
yeah. Do you think that was a cultural thing to do with the school, or do you think that was to do with demographic, or a combination of the two, or how strict the rules were? Like, what was your main reason for the difference between the two schools?
Consistency with how well the rules are applied, and then parental buy-in.
Mm.
Because in the previous school where I was taking them all the time, you might take them and then, you know, you'd get an email from the parent going, "Why'd you take my child's phone? I know it's the school rules, but I want them to have their phone." Um, to which I would say something like, "But they were watching YouTube in a lesson."
Yeah,
So it depends.
yeah. When so obviously you're saying there's a situation where a parent wanted you to give it back. When do you normally give the phone back?
So at the end of the day, in my current school, the policy is if we see it, we take it. It goes to reception, and then the kid can pick it up at the end of the day. Sometimes in other places, it's you might get it back at the end of the lesson. Um, and it depends how lenient it is. There are some schools that don't confiscate them at all,
Mm.
and that actually use them. And I know I've got a colleague who has to keep upping the data on her daughter's phone because the school's using it for stuff every day.
Yeah. Yeah. So I've been looking at some studies surrounding this, and it is matching what you're saying. Being older and more frequent user of social media predicted a lower phone ban compliance.
Right.
So that would mean that the older students and the ones that want to be on social media more
Yeah.
um, were more likely to have their phones confiscated. So does that match with what you've been seeing?
Yeah. Generally, the older the student, yeah, they're going to be more active on social media. They're going to be more resistant to rules. If you imagine your typical year seven, they're going to be much better behaved and don't do as they're told compared to your typical year 10.
Yeah, I'm going to pull you up on that because you're in the classroom every day
Yep.
and you're saying a typical year seven versus a typical year 10. And
Mm.
I don't really know the difference
Okay.
because,
So
um,
yeah, so if
well,
generally if you've got a younger student, there's always exceptions, but your younger students are always going to be more compliant with the rules, and I think it stems back to they're still in a bit more of a kind of a primary school mindset where they are trying to please you as the teacher, and they're not too worried about how that might make them look to their friends.
mm,
Whereas as they get older, they start to be more socially aware of what's the the more important thing to them shifts from being um, the approval of the adult in the room to being the approval of all their mates around them, and so they will start to do what the cool thing to do would be, which would be to be defiant in some way.
Yeah, so it's like a social development of a child rather than anything that's specific to being in secondary school.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, okay.
I think
You
so.
did mention primary schools, and I have another study here that's really quite interesting, which says it was a review on the use of mobile devices in primary school classroom, and it showed that the more use of the phone in primary school led to a better numeracy and a better numeracy and literature rate. Um, do you think that this is a good tool to have in the classroom or not?
So the rates actually went up with the use
Yes.
of a phone.
Yeah.
I yeah I think so. That's the thing, isn't it? It's you can either see phones as a distraction and therefore try and eliminate that distraction, or you can see them as a tool and then use that tool. And so I mean the best way of going about it will depend on the very specific circumstances of each individual school. But if you can utilize that tool, I mean, a phone and a student's phone is going to be more entertaining to them, more it's going to be better at keeping their interest than a teacher in front of a whiteboard or a book, because that's what they get their entertainment on. And so if you can gamify or turn
Yeah.
you know what is happening into something they can basically kind of play on their phone, it's disguising learning as play, isn't it? Which is so I'm not particularly surprised. That means they get better outcomes because they're going to be more engaged with it. But that's going to be easier to do at a primary level than it is at a secondary one.
Yeah, and I think that comes back to your point on compliance to adults rather than to peers for, for, for pupils,
Yeah,
effectively.
yeah.
I do raise one small thing about it is that do you think it could actually, especially having a phone that young, exclude some members because of the cost? So, an iPhone could be £1,000. I mean, you can get some Android phones for about £100, but they go out of date. The software needs updating, etc. So, do you think there's an issue surrounding that?
Definitely. You yeah, definitely. The what was I going to say about that? Your there's a massive phone is that child's social status, and they know if it's a naff one or a good one, and so or if it's out of date or whatever. And I think you have to be quite a sort of a socially strong child to play off having a rubbish phone and sort of maintain that kind of credibility that's sort of important to them and their peers. Otherwise, it's a massive source of embarrassment. As sort of silly as that sounds to a lot of people, but
Yeah, no,
it's just once upon a time it was something else, and now it's what phone you have is most important. I did have one. I did go on a trip with Year 8 a few years ago, and they had to hand their phones in because they weren't allowed phones on this trip, and I got two. Like everyone handing in iPhones and whatever, but I had two phones on that trip that were ancient, like Nokia bricks. One kid was completely introverted, basically gave it to me under the cover of darkness, didn't want anyone to see. The other one clearly had made it a bit of his thing. It was really popular. He played off that this phone was, that was like his thing. He's got a rubbish phone, and he kind of owned it. And so that's what I mean. They have to be quite sort of savvy to negotiate that without kind of getting too much ridicule and sort of losing their coolness or whatever it is.
Yeah, it's like a social standard thing, and it's probably always good to bear in mind in a school setting that their peers are there almost their life. In the same way, if you were very, very in a very demanding job and you were there 6, 7 days a week, your colleagues become, in a sense, like your peers and your family
Yeah,
in like a social way. Which, how does that play out in a school? Like, you're in a school that, some of them's got the best phone. Does that help or does it hinder? Where do we find that? Does it, or is it just a one piece of the puzzle in academia?
is in terms of their social
Yeah, yeah.
standing and stuff. Yeah, it's it's your if you have the coolest stuff,
Mm.
you're gonna be that's gonna put you a few rungs up the ladder. 20 years ago it was if you had a Tamagotchi or whatever,
Yes.
but now it's if you have an iPhone 17 Plus Pro
Yeah.
with 500 cameras on the back, isn't it? So
Yeah.
it's part of the puzzle, but I think it's quite a big piece. And it's a surprise to no one that teenagers, the most important thing in a teenager's life is how they look to their friends.
Mm.
And this is quite a big important part of that. So it definitely, if you don't have the best and latest thing, then that definitely opens you up to in potential embarrassment and things like that.
In your school, if you were, say, the head teacher or in the senior leadership team, which is often abbreviated to SLT if you're not in a school context, would you be advocating for a tighter ban on phones, or would you be advocating for a looser ban than you currently have? So you might need to put a bit of context to this.
I don't know. So I work in a grammar school where behaviour isn't really an issue. At the moment, phones are completely banned. They have to keep them in their locker, and you're not allowed to use them in the day at all. And by and large, 99% of the kids follow that. And we have a few that don't, you always do, and they'll try and sneak it around or whatever. I don't know. It's difficult. It's difficult to know. My gut feeling is that it can have a lot of benefits if it can be used well, and so I would be tempted to try and find ways of using phones and technology in a clever way, because it can make engaging so much easier for students, but it has to be done right. It has to be done in a very structured way, because if it isn't, then they're just going to mess about on them. And they're a tool like anything else. The phone is if you're going to view it like that, it's a tool the same way that a textbook is a tool, or the book they write in is a tool. And you can be just as distracted by a phone as you can playing noughts and crosses in your book with the person next to you. So the way you stop that is that as a teacher, you'll look at their books every now and then, and if they keep playing noughts and crosses, they get in trouble for it.
Yeah.
And so
yeah,
it has a structure around it, and they know not to mess about in their books because otherwise they'll get in trouble for it. And you'd need a similar thing for phones, but that's obviously harder to police because it's their phone. So it just depends how feasible that policing would be. But if that's possible, then and the culture in the school is right at the time, and you know that by and large the kids are going to do what's asked of them, then that would be fantastic.
Yeah, so I found some other studies, and one was with 30 English secondary schools. 20 had very restrictive phone allowances where recreational phone use was not permitted, and 10 were more permissive, so they were allowed to use their phones. And they found that there was no difference between the mental well-being of the students in either cohort. So it's really interesting to see that there's no evidence base on which way it is. I feel like it's more of a preference due to the SLT senior leadership team and how they feel about it, rather than actually
it's going to be so individual to schools as well, that for every school where it's positive, there'll be one where it's negative, and so it probably averages out as not making any difference like that. So it's very much it will be very much a case by case basis thing.
Yeah. So you did mention using phones for lessons. Could you describe what that might look like in a school that does use phones?
Yeah, so a really big one is is quizzing. Basically, there is a online platform which is very well known to a lot of most students called Kahoot,
Yes.
which you might have heard of, and it's just a quiz, and the teacher puts the sort of the scoreboard with where the questions pop up on the board, and then the kids sign into it with their phone. It's really easy. It works straight away, and then questions come up, and if you answer them the fastest and the quickest and the most correct, then you get more points and you end up at the top of the leaderboard and you win. So it's fairly typical in that, and I think a lot of teachers view that as a bit of just sort of a thing to do in the last lesson because you're not sure what else and it's a bit of fun, which it can definitely be because there's all sorts of interesting random quizzes on there on flags and logos and whatever it might be.
Yeah.
But is also quizzes on there on, paper 1 AQA physics at GCSE. And there'll be 200 questions on it. And so as a teacher, and then the subtopics within that. So as a teacher, actually, if you were going to use that as a purposeful tool, you could quite happily say, do a quiz on Kahoot. That'll be just as engaging because it's got that competitiveness to it. It's got, it's technical, so it's on technology, so it's got that buy-in as well. It's on their phone, and so, but you then get data out of that because after the quiz you can see what each student knows and what they don't because they've done a test. You've tricked them into doing a test that feels like a game. And there's lots of apps like that do that, and you can get feedback from them. But it is demonized a little bit in certain schools. So it's so if you've got the buy-in, then yeah, it can be really powerful. But you need the structure in place. You need the buy-in from the kids because if you say right, all get your phones out because we're going to play Kahoot, and then half of them
Go on YouTube.
go on, sit there scrolling on TikTok. As a teacher at the front, you can't really see that because you just got a classroom of kids on their phones. So you have to know that you're going to get that buy-in. So
Yeah.
but
There's
it
also
can be powerful.
Yeah, and also it's a bit of how parents also restrict their child's phone. So there are ways of blocking apps, not allowing apps, and so on. And it's whether the parents have gone to those efforts to child lock their phone and do those other things that are really important.
Yeah.
So it's a hard one to finish up with, but ultimately, regarding phones, do you think they're good or bad for a
Oh,
student's well-being?
I'm going to cop out of this
I knew you would.
and say is a notebook good or bad?
Mm.
Not really either. If you use it to write your work in, it's good. If you use it to doodle, and you're not supposed to doodle, then it's bad. The phone's the same. If you use it for good, you could have a phone and all that's on it is the Kahoot app, which you use. Well, I don't know if it's an app actually, but anyway, that you use properly and engage with, and then Duolingo, and then a bunch of other educational things, and you think marvelous. That's a thing for good. But if all you've got in there is TikTok, Facebook, Instagram, and whatever else brain rotting stuff there is, then that's not good. So it depends how you use it.
Yeah, I feel like it's wrapped up in everything I've read and looked up on this topic that it has improved some grades in primary schools, but like you were saying, primary school students can be more compliant, but then higher social media, higher use in older students means that they're less likely to want to follow the rules, and then you then get that barrier of learning, which is the last thing that you want as a teacher.
Yeah.
So we're going to move on to the potential. Now, I don't know how it would work in practice, and maybe you might be able to give some insight to it, is of a 4-day school week. Now,
we can only dream.
yeah,
Or not.
I don't know how this would work. So I think the best thing for you to explain to me would be, how does like a timetable work? Because how does a timetable work, and how do you think it would fit into 4 days rather than 5, purely from a student perspective?
So students have to do at the moment something like give or take a few days, 190 days of school a year in a state school. And so you'd be fifthing that, wouldn't you? Or four, you'd be taking away 20% of them. And so it's how you would fit all the subjects into that time. It can be done. And so at the moment you've got, every school will have a slightly different timetable to suit their particular cohort of kids. But in my one, for example, and I don't think it's particularly unusual, we have 5-hour lessons a day. Some schools do 6, but they might be sort of 45 minutes or something like that. So you're looking at about 5 hours of learning a day, 5 days a week. So you have 25 hours, and you're cutting that down to 20 hours a week. And so obviously you're going to have to do less teaching hours. So I think timetable wise, it would just be a case of you do less hours, and so instead of 4 lessons a week of maths, you'd do 3 lessons a week of maths. And so I think there would need to be changes in curriculum to accommodate that, especially something like science. But I don't think that's a bad thing, because science is so over bloated at the moment in terms of all the stuff they need to know. There's I love this fact, but that you have to learn more new words for a biology GCSE than you have to for a Spanish one.
Wow.
And yeah, so there's just too much in there. And there doesn't need to be that much in there. And so you could cut it down by a fifth or a quarter, and it would be fine.
Do you think that there should be, by unbloating the syllabus, do you think that could be done by I completely forgot what I was going to say then.
But something like that would have to be done by who is it? Is it Ofqual? There's an exam. There's sort of it's done on a sort of a national curriculum level.
Yeah. Do you think that could be done by reducing the number of facts you have to learn at GCSE? There's a lot of factual learning rather than process learning. So, especially as I went on, I found that I went more in depth and more processes were learned. Whereas when I was in GCSE, it was very much how many, what sort of voltage does electricity transport in a power line, for example, which is a fact I don't remember.
300,000.
Yeah, but it's something that's in the GCSE syllabus, and I'm not sure how relevant that is as a physicist myself.
Yeah, so but that's what I mean. There's so much in science. There's so much you could take out that you don't need to know at sort of a GCSE level, because as soon as you go any higher, you don't need to know that much when you sort of specialise. So I think you could take it out. The curriculum has changed since 2016, so it isn't so kind of rote learning facts anymore. Okay. Back when we did it, now it is much more process learning. You have to have a decent understanding, because before you could sort of cram the night before the whole syllabus, try and remember as many facts as you can and get a decent grade. You can't do that now. You have to remember more, but it's that. So yes, you could reduce the number of facts, and I suppose that's what it would be, because you're just slimming down the syllabus. So it's just taking out sort of chunks that aren't that important, and that you could just learn later when you need to know them when you want to become a physicist. Because, I did have a good example of this the other day, but I can't think what it might be now. But a 16-year-old doesn't need to know. What was a good example I had? I can't remember one now. But there's plenty of stuff in there that they just don't need to know at that level, because you learn it at A level anyway.
Yeah, maybe
so
one of the electron shells it's very fundamental for chemistry, but then when you learn it in high level of chemistry and physics, it actually becomes less like a shell. It's an energy level and so on. So it's getting those misconceptions.
I don't know, because that one.
or is that more of a laddered one that
That's
needs
kind of a
to be?
laddered building block. You probably would need that because it's pretty fundamental, but it's kind of the bits where it goes a bit more specialist. So one of the things they took out of GCSE recently, which was a good
Yeah.
example because they took it out, is that you adding resistors in parallel.
Mm.
So like I feel like a GCSE should set you up with the science you need to know, or any subject you need to know to get by. One, get by in everyday life,
Hmm.
and two, have you be prepared for sort of the next steps.
Mm.
If you wanted to go and do A level, that's kind of the idea, right? But learning how resistors add in parallel, you do not need that in everyday life.
Mm.
And if you went and it's a very easy fact to learn if you were to then go and do it at A level. So it's things like that, and it might not necessarily be electron shells because you do a lot of explaining how chemistry works with that.
Okay.
But it might be, you know, the more nuanced part of the atom. Like, do we need to know? Do we need to know what protons and neutrons are
Mm.
at that point, or can that wait? Maybe not. I don't know.
Yeah,
I've
it
not
probably
thought
is one of
I've
those
not thought deeply
examples.
enough about it. But there are plenty of areas where it can be slimmed down.
Yeah.
That's definitely for sure.
Yeah, maybe say the color of a specific chemical reaction is something that you wouldn't need to know because you'd always, especially nowadays, have the technology to be able to quickly Google it to see whether or maybe something like that would be a better example
Yeah.
in chemistry. But it's really good to know that those things like protons, neutrons, electron shells, they're fundamental, so they wouldn't change. But it's those facts like the voltages and the resistors in parallel would be the ones to change. So, as a parent, would my child be able to learn the same amount in 4 days as they would in five?
I think so. So the I think so because having recently myself gone from teaching 5 days a week to teaching 4 days a week, I am so much of a better teacher in those
Oh.
4 days than when I was teaching 5 days because I have more energy. I'm better rested at the weekend. I'm in a better mood. And if you work 5 days, and I'm sure anyone will say by Friday, you're done, and especially
Mm.
Friday afternoon,
Mm.
and that's if you're just working kind of a normal job. But I don't think we give kind of students enough credit for the fact that they are, if they're engaging properly, they are learning for, if they're doing the 5 hours a day, they're they are learning. They're either actively learning and absorbing knowledge or being tested on stuff
Mm.
for 5 hours a day, every single day. And so by the time you get to the end of the fifth day, that Friday afternoon, it's very difficult to do any kind of productive work unless you have a really sort of diligent class of students. But even then, the amount they actually absorb from that is not going to be brilliant because they've not had time to sort of digest it. And
So
so you'd
is
end
this
up with a situation where you're doing less but you're doing it more efficiently.
is this a case of the 4 days would mean that the students have more time to rest?
Basically, yeah. The yeah, and teachers as well, like you said.
Mm.
So yeah, if they've got more time to rest, they'll have it's ultimately it's gonna have that's gonna have an effect on well-being, isn't it? Where they're not at school so much, so they have more time. They have more time.
Yeah. So in the US in particular, they've been trialing 4 day school weeks and they found there was no difference across most subjects, but in maths actually, the average score of 11th grade maths, so this is American, so slightly different to the UK, just reduced. They got 0.09 standard deviations lower, so a small percentage lower. So across the board, it seems very positive. There's no difference. But why maths? Like, why do you think maths? Is it?
So being educational research is really difficult
Mm.
because it's difficult to get a good control group.
Yeah.
because it's not ethical to have a control group. You
No.
can't say I'm going to try this on these students because I think it will benefit them, but I'm not going to do it on you to see how much worse it will make you, because it's not ethical. So it's difficult to know how much, you know, with that group of particular group of students that got, you know, 0.09 standard deviations worse, were they just coming in from a slightly lower level to begin with?
Yeah, so it
So
was pointed out that those students were from a few schools in I believe it was a non-rural setting. So it could be just a few particular schools that didn't adapt very well.
yeah,
And like you were saying, it's so hard to do research on, well, on um,
yeah.
education
So
because of restrictions and the fact that we don't want to make any student behind before they've even started.
yeah, and so I think if it's not a very clear difference, then
Mm.
you can kind of say there's probably not really any difference. And so I think that's quite telling. Why maths particularly? I suppose maths has the bad luck of sort of, you know, being demonized in society, doesn't it?
Yes.
Unfairly, of course. But I suppose if one of them's going to fall, then it's probably something like maths
Yeah.
that will take it. And you can reason that in any number of ways. Maybe you could say that if you're not at school, you'll use English because you're reading, you're writing, you're more likely to read a book than you are to do some maths.
Mm.
So you're always sort of practicing your English skills because we're talking now, aren't we? But we're not doing maths now. So if you're going to lose time, then maths is probably more likely to suffer than English. But I'm just guessing at that point.
Yeah. What do you think the impact would be for parents with a 4-day school week? So my initial thought would be, oh no, I work 5 days a week.
Yeah.
Would be my initial thought would be, oh no. But do you think there could be a positive to it? Because in other cultures, you know, it varies on how the children are brought up. So
Yeah.
what do you think? Like, because that's my first thought is, oh no, is
Yeah.
that yours?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
It is the sort of the logistical problems of you need I work 5 days, so what do I do with my kid on the other one? But then a couple of points. I don't like saying this, but school isn't it's not childcare.
Ah, okay.
They're there to learn, and I appreciate that in practice it kind of is childcare because you can go to work while they're at school and they are looked after. But at the same time, we're not there. Our primary role isn't childcare. Our primary role is to get them as good grades as possible. And if them working for a day less means that they either do better or feel better, then we have an obligation to investigate that as well, don't we? To see if it will work. So I see both sides of that. My kind of broader hope would be that everyone adopts a 4-day week because it's beneficial to everyone. So hopefully that would be a sort of a non-issue in the future, and something like schools would have to sort of kickstart that, because that's what's going to drive the pressure in the working world, because people go, so well, I can't work 5 days because I've got to look after my kid on every Monday or whatever. So that's my
it does open up like a bit of a can of worms of sort of, is a 4-day work week better? And there have been studies that have shown it'd be better for adults quite clearly. And I think it comes back to, for me, when I've sort of had bank holiday weekends, my focus for that week is better.
Yeah.
When I'm at work, I'm much more engaged all the time. Whereas if I'm there and I say have to work a Saturday or a Sunday because I've got an experiment set to do, I'm tired, I'm drained, I need that refresh. And it has been shown that that's the same with adolescents as well. So a 4-day school week was associated with several positive health outcomes, improved in student engagement, which is exactly what we both just said, but also other things where they managed to find out things like there was a decreased substance use, which again is really positive, which you'd think if the child had more time to hang out with their friends and maybe fall into a wrong crowd, then, but actually it's shown that that isn't the case. Decreased non-school screen time, and that's screen time is can be seen as very negative. As we said, if they're not using Kahoot and doing Duolingo, if you're scrolling on TikTok, that can be deemed quite negative and like a brain drain, as people have said. And increased physical activity, which I think is so important.
Yeah.
So that's some really positive news, but it also had several negative health outcomes. There was an increase in bullying, which surprised me because there's less time at
Yeah, you
school. And
think that,
I
yeah.
always pictured bullying happening most at school. It would be interesting to dive deep at some point into that. Decreased sleep, that also surprised me as well. And breakfast consumption. So these were what the study looked at. So it seems to have some positives and some negatives, but again, I feel like it needs to fit in with the family situation. That
Yeah.
to me seems like the most important thing about however many days we work a week.
Yeah, those. I can see why those effects might happen. Actually,
Yeah.
thinking about them, the yeah, because a lot of bullying is cyberbullying.
Do you think that's
So
the majority of bullying from your personal experience?
the more I've had to deal with is probably stuff online. It's always be they put this about me in the group chat.
Mm,
That's nine seems to be most of what I hear. I don't know if that's
mm.
true, but that's most of what I
Yeah.
hear.
Your experience.
The yeah, and so I suppose there's a bit more opportunity for that.
Mm.
Um, it doesn't surprise me that they sleep less because it's one less school night, isn't it?
Yeah.
So they wouldn't be made to go to bed so early, potentially.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, I read something the other day. I can't remember, and it's sort of on the outer fringes of my mind, but it was a stat that we've gone from having um, I think it was something like 1 in 10 people 10 or 20 years ago. 1 in 10 young people had, I can't remember if it was young adults or teenagers, but similar kind of demographic, had a sort of a mental health need of some sort of a sort of a diagnosed
Mm.
mental health sort of need, and now that's come up to 1 in 4, sort of since COVID and that sort of thing. And so I think anything we can do that might help that is definitely worth investigating. And I don't, yeah, and so I think the effect that I've personally had from having a 4-day work week has been massive. And so if you know if other people can be helped by that, it should be being looked into and debated.
Yeah, again, I can only really speak from experience of bank holidays, but it's definitely a noticeable engagement difference between
Yeah.
those weeks and
I
other
think
weeks.
the big difference I find is that if you've got a normal weekend, on
Mm,
Saturday you're too tired to do anything because
mm.
you've just had your work week, and then on Sunday you can't really enjoy it because you've got work tomorrow.
Yeah,
Whereas if you've got 3 days, it feels like you have an actual weekend.
I I feel like this opens up a little bit of a door to the homework discussion, in that if you had a 4-day week, does that encourage students to learn how to become independent learners, which is really a key skill once you leave school?
Yeah.
Because the homework that's set could be done on that fifth day, but it's done under their terms rather than having a teacher watch over them. Do you think that could help?
Potentially, again, that would completely depend on the school and the individual students.
Mm,
What I think that would, what that has given me though is sort of a potential solution to the, you know, if they've got more time at home, it could be that some of the work they have to do, like if the schools are struggling to fit in all the curriculum they need to in the 4 days a week, it might be that parts of it turn into more kind of self-guided stuff
Yeah.
that they might do outside, and that isn't necessarily a bad thing if they've got the right structures in place and resources they can use. That isn't a bad thing necessarily,
Yeah.
as long as it isn't lazy teaching.
Yeah, oh, I completely agree. And it might be more of a case of reviewing something as
Yeah.
a teacher rather than going through all the processing of, scaffolding or like building the knowledge of the students.
Yeah.
So, an interesting thing I found was they looked at sort of some other effects of a 4 day week, and one of them was effects of a 4 day school week on physical education exposure and childhood obesity. This again was a study undertaken in America, so different culture. But it said that enrollment time in school and student teacher ratio were significantly lower in 4 day school weeks. 4 day school weeks, schools provided significantly more PE, both in minutes um, and time per day. So effectively, it's the same. It's even more physical education. Obesity prevalence did not differ significantly between the schools. So one concern a parent might have is, oh, my child's off school, they're not having some sort of structured exercise program or, keeping active during PE. Do you think that those other subjects, other than your core maths and science, do you think they will be helped by a 4 day school week or hindered?
If you're going to cut anything,
Yeah.
you're going to cut the non-essentials
Mm.
and the stuff that I mean, schools are judged on league tables, and that's how many students have passed English and maths. So the
Okay.
school's main priority is get as many students a 4 and
Yeah.
above in English and maths as possible. That's their
Is
main
it
goal.
just English? Sorry, is it just English and maths? I think it's
Yes.
really. So does that mean that?
So it depends. There's a few ways you can do it, but that's kind of the
Okay.
basic. That's what the basic measure used by the government is
Okay.
is passes in English and maths,
Yeah.
and then schools will advertise their how many their average GCSE grade, but that's more for a sort of parent focused thing.
Mm. Yeah.
Yeah, so they will all English and maths will always take the front seat, and then they put them in what they call buckets. So English and maths are the first bucket, and then
Yeah.
science
Humanities.
and humanities was second
Yeah.
bucket, and then you have sort of languages and other. I can't remember if languages. I can't remember the buckets, but the first bucket's the most important.
Yeah.
And then it kind of there is a hierarchy, and
Okay.
so PE is a non-examined subject. They
Mm.
will trim that down as much as they can.
Mm. So I will ask you another difficult question to end. Are you pro or against a 4 day school week?
Oh, that's easy. I'm so for it.
Okay.
I'm so for it because the difference it's made to me in my life,
Yeah.
changing. As a student, I personally would have been able to engage with school much better and learn much more if I had a 4 day school week, because the amount of time I'd waste in school
Mm.
just daydreaming or staring out the window, not really listening, not really engaging, was really high. And I think, a lot of that is down to the fact that I was probably just tired.
Yeah.
Which partly will be my fault for not sleeping properly or whatever. So I'm not
Yeah.
necessarily blaming. I'm not trying to say my lessons were necessarily boring, or I'm sure some of them were.
Mm.
But if with a 4 day week, it's just so much easier to apply yourself in more, more because you don't need because you're not as knackered.
Yeah. Less pressure.
Yeah.
I think for me, I'd like to weigh in. I would say I think I would prefer a 4 day school week. Because I feel like there's so many other things to learn that aren't to do with a textbook. That there's things like, going out, climbing a tree, and I say that as a stereotypical example. And I know from my experiences with universities that the Monday morning lecture is empty, and the attendance is low, and that kind of is an ongoing reflection of you've got to university and those Monday mornings and Friday afternoons, you know, there's no one there and
Yeah.
it's a bit too much. So I'd like to say a massive thank you to Nathan giving us the insight behind the red pen of what happens in a school.
Very welcome.
Be sure to check out Wavelength Nutrition if you're interested in asking any more questions on education, finding out how we can help your child. So
And
thank you
if
very
you
much.
have any questions for me or us,
Yes.
or discussion points for us, please send them in to us at info@wnutrition.co.uk, and we can answer them.
Yeah, great. Thank you so much and see you next time.
Thank you. Bye bye.